All right. Well, first of all, welcome everyone to the Heterodox East Asia Communities webinar on the case of Professor Yuan Keqin. So, first of all, just a brief explainer about our group. So, Heterodox Academy East Asia. Sorry, I'll say that again. Heterodox East Asia Community is a group affiliated with the United States-based organization Heterodox Academy. It's an organization devoted to bringing or raising public awareness about issues of freedom of inquiry and viewpoint diversity, chiefly in the United States. But our group represents a kind of outgrowth of this organization's remit to East Asia, and with a very modest means available to us as a very small group. We aim to raise awareness about issues of academic freedom, of freedom of inquiry, and also, yes, of viewpoint diversity in the very diverse and politically diverse university systems in East Asia. And of course, Professor Yuan Keqin's case falls within this particular vision, namely because for those who are joining us and who are not familiar with his case, I'll just very briefly explain it. And of course, his son, Chengji, who is joining us for this webinar, can further elaborate. But Professor Yuan was a professor of history at Hokkaido University of Education, a Chinese citizen and a Japanese permanent resident. And on return to his home city in China's Jilin province in May 2019, he was detained by Ministry of State Security agents, and he was placed in detention. And in the year following that, in March 2020, he was charged with espionage. And he remains in Changchun city in custody, in detention, with very infrequent access to lawyers and no access to his family. So this webinar is going to discuss his case, and we will also open the webinar to wider discussion about the situation of Chinese students and professors working and studying in foreign universities, and about the will or lack of will in many cases, or in some cases, of those universities to stand up for and protect those students and professors when their academic freedoms and their liberties are threatened. So our two speakers today, the first speaker is Professor Yuan's son, Chengji Yuan, who was studying abroad in, I think it was the University of Melbourne, was it? Yes.
Yes.
Yes, and has since returned to Japan. He is leading the campaign for his father's release from custody. And our second speaker is Associate Professor Naomi Chi, who works at Hokkaido University and is a member of a free Yuan Keqin support group. And I'll put in the URL for this support group in the chat a bit later. So we'll start the webinar now. So both Chengji Yuan will speak first, and then Naomi Chi will speak, and then we'll have a question session afterwards. And just a warning, my Wi-Fi connection is a little bit unreliable at the moment, so there's a possibility I will drop out. I have made another member of the Heterodox East Asia community, Francis An, the co-host of this webinar. So if I disappear, please don't worry, the webinar will continue. Okay, so well, I suppose we should start. So Chengji, could you start with your presentation?
Yes, thank you so much,
you.
Sean. Yeah, thank you for holding this webinar today regarding the case of my father. And thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to talk about the ongoing detention of my father by Chinese authorities. So first, let me quickly introduce myself and my family. I'm Changji, a son of Keqin. And yes, as Sean mentioned before, we are a Chinese family living in Japan. My parents both came from China, and I was born and raised in Japan. My father initially came from China to Japan in 1984 as a postgraduate student, and he started to work at Hokkaido University of Education from 1994. And he had been a professor teaching East Asian political history until the university actually put him into a retirement last year because he reached the mandatory retirement age, 65 years old in most of cases in university in Japan, while he was remaining detained in China. So we are just ordinary family. My father was just an ordinary researcher at the university in Japan, just doing his research and teaching his students every day. And in my eyes, he really loved what he had been doing as a researcher. And I believe he also dedicated his life to his research. And my father has always been a very honest and earnest person, both at work and at home. He has definitely been a role model for me. And our family had a simple but happy life, just like any family you find everywhere, until the day of detention of my father, which happened 3 years ago. Sorry, so it was May in 2019, 3 years ago, when my father suddenly detained by Chinese authorities over alleged espionage. At the time, he went back to China just because to attend the funeral of his mother, with my grandmother. So his stay in China was supposed to be only for a week, but on the next day of attending my grandmother's funeral, on his trip back to Japan, and authority of China suddenly appeared and arrested my father on the street near the station in Changchun city. I was not there with my father in China. I was actually living in Australia back then. So all this information on what happened to my father became clear to me much later. So after my father was arrested in China, the Chinese authorities did not make any official announcement regarding the detention for almost 10 months, nearly 1 year. So during this time, the Hokkaido University of Education considered that my father had been absent because of sick leave or any other unknown reasons. And my father was treated like as missing or disappeared for a long time. And it was March in 2020 when the Chinese Foreign Ministry finally announced that they have detained my father over alleged espionage, claiming that there is clear evidence against him. And then my relative living in China and the lawyer were first time allowed to see my father finally in May just last year. So it has already been 2 years since my father was arrested. So during these 2 years, no one had ever been allowed to see my father, and I had no way to know his health condition or where he is or how he is. So to be honest, I had no confirmation if he was actually alive or not, because until then, the Chinese authorities had rejected us, with family, to make any direct communication with my father. So after my relatives saw my father with a lawyer last year, they told me that my father seemed to be relatively fine and have no serious health issues. So it was finally only a relief for me, at least. So, and up until now, I still do not know why my father has been charged with espionage. I do not have any clue. The Chinese authorities keep saying that they have clear evidence against my father, but they have never shared any details of evidence they claim to have. The Chinese authorities have detained my father for more than 3 years now, but they still not even started a trial of this case. So we families still do not know when and how the trial is to be conducted. And whenever we request the authority to share any information regarding my father's case, they reject to do so for national security reasons. So I have never doubted on my father's innocence, and I strongly believe that my father would be proven to be innocent if only we had a fair legal rights and fair legal judgment. And I want to save my father, but we are facing, just as Naomi said, we are facing extremely difficult situation. So even though we family are permanent residents in Japan, but we are still Chinese nationals, it is very difficult to expect the Japanese government could give us any support on this matter because we are basically foreigners. And although my father had worked around 30 years at Hokkaido University of Education, it is hard to imagine that the university will act something regarding this case because in my eyes, they did not do anything during this detention period. And now, especially after they put him in retirement just last year, which means on paper, my father no longer officially belongs to the university now. So my only wish is to let the Chinese authorities set my father free and to see my father again in a healthy condition. But under these circumstances, I do not know what I can do to save my father, what is the right thing I should do to save my father. And I feel I am so powerless. I fear that my father's case may become forgotten by public and my father may lose any support from anybody if this detention continues for years. But even so, today I am currently supported by many people who cares about the situation of my father and the fellow researchers. Japan also have given us continuous support to save my father and to appeal to public for more attention on this case. Yes, so I'm still struggling to find what I can do to save my father. Yeah, this is my story, and thank you so much for listening, and thank you, Sharon, for allowing me to talk about my father today. Thank you.
So I'll turn on my audio. Thank you, Chenji. I know it's very difficult to recount this and very painful for you. And thank you for telling us about what has happened to your father. So Naomi, if you would like to speak next.
Yes, thank you very much again for giving us this opportunity to share with you what has happened to Professor Yuan. There are so many actually issues that are involved in this case. It's about how Japan's attitude towards foreigners, how the universities are very apathetic. They're very indifferent to these human rights issues. And I can go on and on about the problems that we have, but I do want to touch upon some points as one of the supporting members of Save Professor Yuan, a group that we have here in Sapporo. So many of you might already know about this separate case that we had here at Hokkaido University. One of my colleagues and my best friend who works at the same department here at the Graduate School of Public Policy was actually detained around the same time. And he's a Japanese national. He teaches Chinese political history here at Hokkaido University. And he was detained for 2 months before he was released. And even at that moment, I was very appalled at how Hokkaido University was very indifferent to his case. They didn't want anybody to share this information with the public. They told us, they discouraged us to do anything. So we found out that the name of this person is Nobu Iwatani, Professor Nobu Iwatani, and he was detained. We heard the news in second or third week of September, but it turns out that he had already been detained in the beginning of September. Now, when they let us know about it, in the second, I think, if I remember correctly, I think it was second week of September, we obviously wanted to do something for him. We wanted to, do what we can to help him. And we decided to have a support group, just like the one we have for Professor Yuan. And 5-6 of us here working in the same department started a group, and we wanted to, we started what we did with Professor Yuan as well. We started a petition, and the letter, we tried to make the letter as politically neutral as possible. And we asked a lot of our friends to join us in requesting the release of our colleague and dear friend. But when the main administration at the university knew about this, they told us to stop. They told us that we should not do anything because it will actually be, it will go, it will be not helpful, but it would actually be, it would have a negative impact on bringing him back. And so we were stuck and because we didn't have any other means to help our colleague. But that didn't discourage us. We decided that we'll do it without telling anybody. So we, instead of having it online, as the way we have for Professor Yuan, we took it all off from it was online for a moment. I actually set up a very simple internet site for people to come and sign, but we decided because of the warning that was given from the main administration, we took it down. And what we did was we spread it by email. And so we were able to gather at the end, I think 300 signatures, but that was only for a couple of weeks. I mean, we were only able to gather signatures for about a couple of weeks. So, but even in that short period of time, I thought we did, okay in terms. I mean, since we weren't able to do it publicly, everything was, sort of underwater. It was we had to do it by email, and so we tried to do what we can. And for Professor Iwatani, luckily he was released after 2 months being detained by the Chinese authorities. Now, while this was going on, also another colleague at the Slavic Eurasian Research Center, Professor Akihiro Iwashita, who is actually a good friend of Professor Yuan, he talked really, when he first told me about the case, he talked very fondly about Professor Yuan. He talked about how Professor Iwashita met Professor Yuan and Chenji, and also he has an older sister, and how they used to come over to their place for dinner, and they were and he spoke very fondly of him, and he told me that it seems like he's been detained since May. Now, it's by coincidence, of course, but I already had a little bit of experience of finding ways to collect the signatures from people, have the petition going. And so what we did was we set up an internet site right away, and that's where people can come and just they can just click a link and then they can sign. And it's been very slow since COVID. We haven't been able to update the petition since last year, but last year I think in June we had already 1,500 signatures. So the first few years since we knew about his detainment, we did receive quite a bit of support. The issue that we have now is that with COVID, and also because of sort of lack of anything, there's lack of action on the Chinese side. There's not much we can tell people, and so we're concerned that people might forget about the case. And what we're trying to do is trying to make sure that we can create at least some kind of awareness that people we will continue to think about this and continue to support us for bringing Professor Yuan back to Sapporo. One of the other things we did was we called the embassy, the Japanese embassy in China. I called them actually a couple of times, more than a few times, and asked them if there's anything that they could help us with the case. And every time I called them, I received the same response: there's nothing we can do because he's not a Japanese national. And to me, actually, that is very discouraging, because I also am a foreigner working in Japan, just like Chenji's father. And I've been working almost 13 years now here at the Graduate School of Public Policy. And it's really, it's very close to heart, because what if I'm the next person being detained in China? What will my university do for me? What will my colleagues do for me? And what will Japan do for me? Probably nothing. I mean, my colleagues will probably do something for me, but our university, I mean, I could see what the case we had was a Japanese national, and the university didn't do much for him. And so when it comes to a foreigner, I can just see what they would respond. And the embassy in Beijing as well, they said the same thing. They said, well, there's nothing we can do because he's not a Japanese national. Please consult someone else. And that's the response that I got every single time that I called them. And also, there's not much help we can get in Japan for Professor Yuan. I mean, it just comes down to that very brutal fact that because of our status here in Japan as foreigners who haven't naturalized into Japanese nationality, there's nothing that they will do for us, even though we're all permanent residents living here for a very long time, and also contributing to the universities and contributing to the academic society here, and also fostering new talents here in Japan. There's a lot that Professor Yuan did for the university, yet when they heard that he was detained, they refused to do anything about it. They were not only were they indifferent, but they really didn't want to do anything with the case. I mean, I can just tell that every time we ask them, is there something that you can do to help Professor Yuan? Can you not sign a petition or make a formal claim to the consulate here in Sapporo, the Chinese consulate in Sapporo? They said, well, we're still looking into it. I mean, the response that we always got was very negative. We're looking into it. There's not much we can do. And as Jinji just said, now that he's officially retired, there's nothing that we can do. We can ask the university to do. So we basically stuck. The other thing that we also did was we also contacted many of these international NGOs that work on human rights issue. We contacted Human Rights Watch. We contacted Scholars at Risk, and they were as helpful as they could be. They wrote a report for us, and they put it up on their website, and they helped us with raising public awareness. And but I mean, there's also not much that they can do as well. I mean, I think they did what they can for us, but after writing the report for us, there's not much that they could do after that. So we tried all the avenues that we thought might help Professor Yuan. We tried it out. We called these people. We contacted them various times. We had online meetings with them, but at the end of the day, it was, well, there's not much we can do. And that's the response that we got from many of the other international organizations that work on human rights issue. I also contacted the UN, the group for arbitrary detention. There are a couple of these working groups. I've contacted them. I contacted them literally like 30, 40 times. I can show you my email box. I wrote them 30 times. And I received one response once, and all they had to say was, we are understaffed and very busy, and with the COVID, we're out of the office. There's nothing we can do. That's basically the response we got. So as I said, all the channels that we thought that might help Professor Yuan's case, we did try to contact them, and we tried to ask for help, but here we are at with and of course COVID was a big issue because nothing was moving in the last couple of years, but we're kind of out of we are stuck, and we are running out of ideas as to how we can continue to raise public awareness and on how to continue to demand for the return of Professor Yuan. It's been 3 years already. We even the family don't know whether they haven't met his family in China have not met with him. Certainly the family here in Sapporo, and also he's got a sister in Vancouver. They haven't seen him for a long time. They haven't even talked to him ever since he's been detained. None of us have any idea to how he's doing right now, his health conditions, whether his rights are being met. We have no information about him or on him, and it's very discouraging because we are literally stuck. We are running out of ways to help him come back. And as I mentioned earlier, when it comes to fighting against dictatorial powers, we are very helpless. There's not much we can do. And all we can do is raise our voice. But even those voices are decreasing because people forget. And it's not that we blame people, but if there's certain information that we attain, and if we can update that information, that would be even better. Because people will keep coming back to the website, and they'll keep tuned to and try to gather new information. But we have nothing to tell because we don't receive anything from China. We don't know what's going on. Obviously, we have problems with transparency in China, so we don't even know what the case. I mean, we don't even know whether there has been a trial or not. What the verdicts are, or nothing. We have no information whatsoever. It makes it really difficult for us to make our next move. So we can we need all the help that we can get. And now that COVID has stabilized a little bit, maybe this is maybe a good time to maybe think about certain new avenues or new strategies to raise more awareness. Also, I think ideally it would be best if there's some way we could also get in touch with the family in China, but it seems that that's also very difficult because that could be very dangerous to the family in China. So we would like to reach out, but that is also problematic because the family, we could put them in danger as well. So as I said, I mean, I keep saying the same thing, but we really are stuck. There is not much we can work with. So if we could maybe discuss about if people have other ideas, if anybody has any similar experiences that can share with us, we would just greatly appreciate any kind of help that you might know of. So thank you very much for again taking your time out to listen to Professor Yuan's case. I'm always so sorry to Chunchi because there's not much we can do for you, and I'm just very, very sorry. But don't forget that we're here for you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
I'm actually a little bit emotional myself. Thank you, Naomi, for discussing how much your support group has tried to bring Professor Yuan's case to public attention. Are there any questions? I'd like to open this session to questions and comments from other members of the audience. So if anyone has any questions or even any suggestions for help or assistance.
Naomi, hi. Thank you for sharing all of your efforts, and it just sounds like it is a very emotional, difficult story to hear. I wonder if you've gotten in contact with PEN International.
No, that's I don't know much about that organization, but is that do they work on human rights issue?
Yeah, so they specifically work on writers and journalists who've been detained in usually totalitarian regimes because of things that they've written. So I mean, I guess it's difficult because no one really knows exactly why Professor Yuan was detained. But if it was because of something that he had written, I can always get you in contact with Ross Holder, who's the Asia and Asia Pacific coordinator for intellectual and academic, well, writers' freedom issues in that region. And then maybe they can get Professor Yuan on their, like they have a case list that comes out every year or something. So maybe they can get Professor Yuan on that case list, and then the whole PEN network can campaign around his issue and write letters to the government and things like that.
Thanks for that information. One of the problems that we have, as Changchun mentioned, was that we don't really know what they have against him. We don't know what they say, that they have evidence, that they made that clear in March of 2020, but we don't know what that evidence is. And so we, because they publicly mentioned that they have evidence. So what we tried to do was we went back to his writing, and we, all of us read his book, his papers, his articles that he wrote, and we looked at it to see if there was anything that might, that might be, that they might use as, evidence. But he's a historian, and he's a very honest historian, and he basically uses the archives. And none of us, I mean, I'm not a specialist on Chinese history or Chinese diplomatic history, but for those people who read, the specialists on the same issue, same theme, that have read the books, read his books and his articles, they say that they also can't figure out what it is. There are certain key words, key ideas that the CCP do not like, and maybe, so we went through his book and his writings to see if there were those key sort of words that they don't like, but we really couldn't find anything. And the book that he produced it's been a few years already. So I mean, if they're taking if they're saying that they have evidence, we thought maybe it was something that he recently wrote, but even when we went back to his journal articles, his recent articles don't really, I mean, it's nothing that we could see, that we can't foresee that would be, harmful to the CCP. So that's another problem. Scholars at Risk also asked me the same questions. They said, is a particular thing he said, or a particular work that he, like, writings, is something in his writing? And we couldn't find anything. And then some scholars in Japan are also very active on media as well. Professor Yuan is not that type of scholar. He's very much, he remains in sort of, he does much, he writes a lot, but he doesn't go on media or anything like this. So, we can't think of anything that he might have said that particularly would be harmful to CCP. So if many of the organizations asked for, some kind of evidence, what is it that he's being detained for? And all we can say is after March 2020, we are able to tell them, yes, he's been charged for espionage. Then they say, well, what is it that particularly that, is it some kind of, is it in his writing? Is it something he said? But because we don't have that information, or we couldn't find anything, so it makes it really hard for us to also relay that kind of thing, that to international organizations.
Right. So it almost sounds like there could be some sort of campaign around, like, I'm thinking of like that hashtag release the tape type things. Like, I mean, obviously the case I'm thinking of is very, very different, but I think many years ago, then Roger Scruton, one of the very landmark conservative intellectuals, he's dead now, but in those days, then he did an interview with, I can't remember who it was, but then the interviewer kind of misconstrued what Roger Scruton had said, and kind of ruined his reputation. So then there was a lot of Roger Scruton's students, one of the most notable ones, Douglas Murray, then they had this whole campaign around, like, release the tape, and then finally they got a hold of the tape, and then they managed to clear Roger Scruton's name. So obviously it's a very, very different case because it's confined to Britain and maybe parts of America. So I imagine with Professor Yuan's case, then it would be much more complicated to do something like that. But I wonder if there could be some sort of, release the evidence campaign.
Yeah, that's something maybe we could try. We haven't tried that. We've been writing letters, petition letters, and we always try to be very politically neutral, and we've also very toned down sort of voice. And we every time we write a letter, a petition letter, and we make it public, we always make sure that we're not criticizing the CCP. We're just asking, we're demanding just for the return of Professor Yuan. We have no intentions of harming the CCP or kind of thing. That we've been kind of continuing to do that because we didn't want the CCP to think that we were attacking them personally. So yeah, and that's why we were very, very careful about it. So maybe for the next step we could change the tone of our voice or maybe try something a little bit different, saying well, if you mentioned that you do have evidence, you made that information public in 2022, but we haven't heard anything from you, we haven't seen the evidence, so we demand that we see that evidence. We haven't done that yet because again, we didn't want to have a negative impact on Professor Yuan's case, so we kept the tone very neutral.
Thank you, Naomi.
Thank you.
I've got a kind of a comment. It's about another case in Japan involving a Chinese citizen, which you might know about. And things went very differently. An unhappy ending, unfortunately, but the degree of institutional cooperation was quite extraordinary.
Wow.
And this goes back 23 years, this case. And it suggests to me that a lot has changed in that time. So this concerns a Uyghur scholar named Toti Tonyas.
Yes.
So he was a doctoral student. He was a graduate of Minzu University in Beijing, quite a noted polyglot intellectual from Xinjiang. And he became a doctoral student at the University of Tokyo. And in 1998, 1998, I think, early 1998, he flew to Urumqi city in Xinjiang to do archival research on independence movements in Xinjiang in the 1930s and 40s. And he had received prearranged approval with the Public Archives Office in Urumqi to receive a copied list of the so-called independence organizations in the 1930s from the archives, city archives. So he received not an original document, but a copied document from the staff in the archives office. That night, several Ministry of State security officers arrested him in his hotel room, and he was taken into custody and held in detention for a number of months before his family and his supervisors and friends in Tokyo found out what had happened to him. They launched a campaign, much as the campaign was launched to have Professor Yuan released. And in this case, there was a lot of institutional cooperation. So we have to ask ourselves, what has changed since then? The University of Tokyo was persuaded to maintain his doctoral position, to keep it open. A few years later, when one of his supervisors retired, they appointed another supervisor to be on standby for when he came back to Japan. And the University of Tokyo did also periodically raise his case with China. I don't know through what channels, but it did. And we're talking about someone who is not a Japanese citizen.
Right.
His supervisors organized a large campaign, petitions and so on. They also petitioned a number of organizations, Amnesty International, PEN International, I think Scholars at Risk. These organizations all took up Tunias's case. They petitioned the United Nations, the same organization which the Yuan Keqin group petitioned, the Commission on Arbitrary Detention.
Yeah.
They took it up. They took his case up. They assessed a number of Chinese allegations against Toti Tonyas, one of which was that he had authored, while in Japan, he had authored a book advocating for Uyghur separatism in Xinjiang.
Okay.
The United Nations High Commission found against all of the Chinese allegations and charges against Toti Tunyaz that no such book existed, that all of the allegations against him were false, that he had not, as he'd been accused of, been trying to steal state secrets. The information which he had taken from the Urumqi Archives Office had been approved. And so the United Nations High Commission on Arbitrary Detention found that he had in fact been arbitrarily detained, and there's no substance in the charges. The campaign continued right through until Toti Tunyaz was released from prison in 2009. In 2008, former Prime Minister Mr. Abe raised the case with the Premier of China when he visited Japan, and asked for Toti Tunyaz's release. Of course, none of this worked. Toti Tunyaz, he ended up, he served his full sentence. He was released in 2009. Members of his support group came to Urumqi, including his former supervisor, to welcome him, and he was very quickly and quietly sent to Beijing before they had a chance to meet him. In Beijing, he lived for another 6 years under close supervision, was permitted to publish research, again, closely supervised, could not reunite with his wife. I understand some of his children did visit him. Perhaps something of a rather sad footnote on his case, an ethnographer who had done research in Xinjiang told me of meeting him in Beijing, and he asked her to translate some of his poetry into English, and she refused because she was frightened for her own situation in China and had to flee the country not long afterwards. He also said that he was planning to apply for a visa or for a passport to escape or to leave China and go to the United States. I think perhaps 4 months later, he died of a heart attack from a condition which had gone untreated during his long detention in Xinjiang. So yeah, this is not a happy ending, but there was I have to say, quite an extraordinary degree of institutional cooperation. China was more open back then too, so the support group was making regular visits to Urumqi city. His supervisors, his wife, even his guarantor in Japan, who was helping his family, made visits to Urumqi to plead his case to the Chinese authorities, and they were permitted to visit him a couple of times in prison. So I think we have to ask ourselves, well, obviously things have changed in China a lot, so this kind of thing is extremely dangerous or simply just impossible to do now. But we have to ask ourselves why there is a lack of institutional cooperation happening at the moment, which was possible 23 years ago. And that's not to disparage the tremendous efforts you've made on Professor Yuan's case. It's just to ask, why isn't this institutional cooperation happening at the moment that seemed possible 2 decades ago or 23 years ago? And I think, yeah, it's kind of worth discussing why universities are not being cooperative. And not just in Professor Yuan's case, but in quite a number of cases I know of, where Chinese students or Chinese citizens who are students have been persecuted, have been intimidated, and the universities flat out refused or were kind of apathetic in acting on their behalf. So yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to say.
I've heard the name, but I didn't know the story, the whole story behind it. But I think, yeah, maybe the situation in China is different than before for his case. But obviously that's not the only. I mean, that's not the only explanation, I'm sure. Maybe perhaps I'm not sure. Do you know the name of his supervisor?
I wrote an article about it for the Japan Times. I'll see if I can dig it up.
Okay, I'll look for your article as well. I'm just thinking maybe in many cases here in Japanese universities, when certain issues are being raised, it oftentimes is because of the effort of number of individuals. So maybe his supervisor, or maybe they had a group of people that were very vocal within the university that they couldn't ignore. I'm not sure. I don't know, but just with our university, I wanted to share another episode So I have been in touch with Agnes Chow. She one of the student leaders of the Umbrella Movement. I actually interviewed her in 2014, and we've been keeping in touch since. And we all have she and I have both like common friends, and we we wanted to support her as much as we can, and we really admired and respected her for her courage. And so we in terms of showing our our respect for her, we wanted to offer a fellowship for her here at the university. So there's no stipend or anything like that. It's just it's a name, it's Hops Fellow. But we wanted her to come and talk to her students, and so we were praying for her to. So the fellowship itself was a year, and we wanted to invite her to come to Sapporo to give talks, but that was all suspended because she was detained in Hong Kong, and when we had publicly announced on our website that she is one of our fellow, the consulate, the Chinese consulate, actually called our main administration, and actually I think a couple of times, not just once, but I think two or three times, and they made an official complaint saying why first of all, she's still a university student, why is she a fellow, and second, we don't think that she is fit to be a fellow of a national university in Japan. And they actually made an official complaint for making her one of our fellows. But that's our, that's our freedom, isn't it? Like, we can make anybody our fellow if we think that she or he fits, our purpose or education and research purposes. But the Chinese consulate was on our case on that as well. I think, and I don't want to. I'm not going to mention any names, but for instance, like many of my students, Chinese students here, and I think that might be same for many of you here. Most of my students tend to be very apolitical. They try not to make any. They don't try not to make any political comments in class, because, as you know, what they do is they report on each other, right? Because the Chinese consulate request them to look and see if there's anybody that maybe that may cause problems, and so nobody knows who is the person that's reporting on them. So they try to make sure that they don't say anything political, or any of the any of the keywords that the CCP doesn't like, and you can see that they're very, very careful when they speak up. Because they don't know who is working for the consulate or who's working for that side. So just in a seminar situation, like in classroom situation, you can see that there's a little bit of tension there, and they try not to step on each other's toes, and they're all friendly with each other, of course, but when they meet, they don't talk. They talk about everything but politics, or but Chinese politics. So you can, and that was way different than, say, when 20 years ago, when I was a graduate student here at Hokkaido. We also had Chinese students at that time, and they were much vocal than now, for sure. But in the span of 20 years, Sean, I think you're absolutely right. There has been a lot of things have changed. Maybe also in Japan, but also in China as well. It's making it really difficult for people, even Chinese people, to speak up. So.
Changji, I just wanted to ask you about your experience at Melbourne University. So there's been quite a lot of, you've probably heard of Drew Pavlou, the young Australian activist at University of Queensland, who raised questions about the Confucius Institutes and the issue of Chinese government influence at the University of Queensland, Australian universities. From your observation at University of Melbourne, did you see sort of conditions of self-censorship amongst fellow Chinese students? And also, did the university really take an interest in protecting the academic freedom of anyone who might have been at risk in those conditions?
Yes. Yes, I also saw that the news about the students at the University of Queensland. But my experience in the University of Melbourne, to be honest, I didn't see any live example in my college life. Maybe I was a science student, so maybe just it's one of the reasons. So I didn't have any interaction with like other Chinese people regarding the topics of politics. So yes, so in my case, yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have any good example to share.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, obviously, yeah, a lot of people do go through the university system without sort of any unpleasant experiences or without being exposed to any of this sort of thing, which I think is good and it's lucky and that's how it should be. Yeah, so yeah. Yeah, I mean, I have quite a lot of Chinese students myself at Kyushu University. I never raised any of these issues with them deliberately, partly because sometimes it's just not relevant to, and also sometimes, and because I don't want to get anyone into trouble. But I will discuss in class where they do initiate a conversation, and a couple have. One, in fact, discovered some of my Japan Times articles on academic freedom in China, and also had a look at my Twitter feed, and actually swiveled his laptop around to show me when I asked him why he'd raised an issue about Chinese political freedoms in one of his homework exercises. He said, well, I read your articles, I read your Twitter feed. So, okay. So I said, so I realized that he realized he could sort of discuss this kind of thing with a certain amount of freedom with me, and I wouldn't ignore him, or I wouldn't say anything disparaging. So I've never really pursued these issues, again, because of a certain concern or reticence that I might get someone into trouble. But yeah, I am open to discussion with them if they want to discuss. And I've noticed that they will talk with me, and it's kind of coded and very heavy with irony, because they have to sort of speak like that, I suppose, even when they're studying at a university in Japan. The only case where something potentially, I don't know, a little bit risky could have happened. It was a course I teach on applied ethics, and we discussed the issue of conscience and civil disobedience. And in my class, there was a Chinese student, and there was a Tanzanian student who was her friend, and as it turned out, he's a Muslim. And in the middle of the class, he turned to her and said, "But don't you know what's happening in Xinjiang to the Uyghurs? It's such a dreadful thing. Don't you know anything about it?" And they were close friends. And she looked really flustered and went straight to Weibo to do a search on the topic. So my only intervention in this case was to just quietly to come up next to her, gently pat her on the shoulder and tell her, "You're not going to find anything there. Try Google." It was kind of a little bit funny because there is actually a T-shirt which is doing the rounds at the moment which says "Google Uyghurs." So I actually literally asked her to do that. Not much came of it afterwards. She did. I guess she found out what she wanted to find out, but I learned later that she was, I suppose, quite defensive about it, and certainly wasn't open to discussing it with anyone. So of course that was something that I let rest too. I didn't want to harass her about it. But yeah, these kinds of things do happen every now and then. I think it takes a certain amount of tact, and I hope I did exercise that in my case to deal with them, because, as I said, I don't want anyone to get into trouble over things they say in class. If there are other Chinese students present who might not be sympathetic and who might report them, or at least cause trouble for them. So yeah, that's kind of the sum of what I've experienced and seen.
Sean, you probably know the work of Ako Sensei at Todai at Tokyo University. She's a sociologist by training, and she works on Hong Kong. She also works on intellectual freedom in human rights issues in China. And she's been very helpful because she knows a lot of cases, and many of them are her personal friends. And she says that, in the course of say 20 years, the situation has gotten really, really worse and really bad. And she even, she works on China, so obviously she should she tries to go to China to do her field work, a few months of the year, but she said that she's planning not to go for a while, because she's also had sort of an encounter with the Chinese authorities herself, and she told she was very she gave us a detailed description of what they say to her and what they how they make these people nervous. She said the last time she had went to China, they said, let's have tea. And so she had went in and met with the Chinese authorities, and they don't say directly why she's here or why they wanted to talk to her. And what they do is they kind of say everything but about the certain thing that they want to ask her. So they start off with saying, so how is your family? You have a son, don't you? You have a son who's in elementary school. How's he doing? And so basically implying we know all your information. We know your your family members. We know how old they are. So they're obviously trying to sort of stress her out mentally, right? And so the meetings she told us is also quite long. Like sometimes it takes few hours, couple of hours, and so they really so she said that these encounters have been much more frequent in the recent years than say before, and many of the scholars that work on China say something very similar to that. They say like it makes it very hard for them to do any field work. Also, going to the archives, they said that it's also a little bit difficult. So Chinese scholars who do work on China, obviously, they are, what their work is trying to let other people know about China, and so you think that the Chinese officials would appreciate what they do, because they're doing work on China, but it's the opposite, right? What they do is they really restrict their so their work there in China, and it makes it. I heard that a lot of people are kind of hesitant to travel to China these days. I mean, of course, there was COVID, but even if there wasn't COVID, they said many of them said that they were reluctant to travel because they were worried about the encounters with the authorities.
Thank you. Yes, I have to say I'm one of those people who was scared. So I was invited to a couple of seminars. One was at as it turned out, one was at Wuhan University in November, scheduled for November 2020 in Wuhan University. That one, of course, just didn't go ahead anyway. And I said this. I received the invitation. I think around the time that Yuan Keqin and Professor Yuan had been detained. I just thought, of course, this wasn't just vanity, like, I'm a really high profile scholar, and they're going to try and nail me once I land there. It was just like, I just don't want to go there. And then another, I think a year later, I was invited by a Chinese scholar based in Australia to participate in a kind of dialogue between Chinese and Australian or other international scholars. And it was with the best of intentions. And he was really, I think, concerned about how this kind of break was opening up, and dialogue between Chinese scholars and scholars outside of China was breaking down in my research field in comparative philosophy. And I sort of, again, I just thought, well, is there a way we can do this by webinar? Because I didn't say outright, I don't want to go, but I tried to sort of make a sort of roundabout proposal of doing it by webinar. And interestingly, a young Chinese scholar working in the United States, he refused flat out to participate because he said, I do work on democracy, on constitutional democracy. I'm an advocate for constitutional democracy. I don't want my English language work to be known in China. He said emphatically, and he refused to participate. So as a result, this proposal, very unfortunately, it kind of fell apart. I think a couple of our chapters from our respective research were translated for a journal at one university, but that's as far as it went. So yeah, on the one hand, I feel deep regret that this couldn't have gone ahead as much as it could have, but on the other hand, yeah, there were just concerns that, well, again, even being invited for tea, if you're just a random scholar, that they sort of decide, well, you're from outside and we've got a few suspicions about you. I'd rather not have to endure something like that if it came to it. So yeah, this is really, really unfortunate, but I think it just can't be helped in the current conditions. Was anyone else, did anyone else want to make a comment or have a question? We can sort of, I guess, wind down this discussion, but of course we can just pass on to any kind of conversation we would like. Francis, perhaps we could wrap up the recording.
Oh, did you want to stop the recording now then?
I don't know. What would everyone else like to do?
I kind of want to make a little comment, if that's okay.
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, now that, kind of the stories are coming out, I kind of have my own in that I used to review, I reviewed 3 academic essay collections on intellectual life and artistic life under Maoist China with this Hong Kong-based literary journal called Cha. And I was reviewing these books for them, and then it was kind of around when the umbrella movement was happening. And then I remember suddenly the editors sort of completely cut contact with me around the time when I think the Apple Daily was being taken out. And then I think I wanted to try reviewing the books again. So then I requested another one if they could send it to me. And then they were like they wouldn't say what it was, but they would always be like, oh, it's, we need to send it via another route, and we can't arrange that at the moment. And I kind of got the sense that, I probably shouldn't push on this too much. And yeah, so, I mean, I think they are still slowly releasing work, but it's very politically careful stuff, like reviews of fiction and new things like that. So I don't know. I definitely feel like the tone has changed a lot.
Yeah. Incidentally, we also had a website for demanding the release of Agnes, and also the founder of Apple Daily. We had to take it down because right after Agnes was detained, we had it for a while, but we were advised by a few people that it might actually not help her, that it would actually go against her. It might work against her. So and it came from somebody actually close to Agnes. So we decided to suspend it for a while, and we haven't put it back up since. So yeah, I know that Agnes she's been released temporarily, but only a number of people can get a hold of her here from Japan. From what I hear, I used to use Messenger with her or Telegram. She doesn't use any of those platforms anymore. I don't know how they get in touch with her, but it seems that she's closely watched, so there's not much she can do. And I don't know much about Joseph Wong. I've never met him, so I don't know much about him. But he used to be very active on Twitter and everything like this, but I don't think he's active very much these days. So.
Maybe one last comment from me. I don't know, I feel like I've talked too much, but the sinologist Perry Link published an essay about 20 years ago on censorship in China. And he coined quite a famous metaphor, which I think could apply to Professor Yuan's case and many other cases, such as the case of the Hong Kong publishers. The metaphor was the anaconda in the chandelier. And it's the idea of being in a state where you feel like you're being watched, but you haven't done anything, and you don't know what you could do to provoke it. And he said this is effectively what the system of censorship in China amounts to, that someone could be detained for no reason at all, no apparent reason, as Professor Yuan has been detained. And of course, everyone tries to think of how they could have been detained. And so they come up with various explanations. And the coming up with those explanations is part of the desired effect of the system of censorship, because it induces watchfulness and self-censorship. And so it is very effective because it often doesn't involve charging people directly with specific accusations or anything that could stick. It is arbitrary. It even works off of errors and mistakes. And I think there's a possibility that Professor Yuan was just arrested because of incompetence, or just a certain amount of random, we need someone to arrest, and oh, this guy fits the bill, we'll nail him. And then, of course, the Ministry of State security agents or their office probably doubled down on this error. And this also has desirable effects, even if it was something that was hatched in a state of mistakenness or error or incompetence. But this also works as well in this system. So it's insidious. It doesn't require mass arrests or mass persecutions. It just involves targeting a few individuals every now and then, enforcing laws against them, which may not actually be enforced that often. Another case I can think of, a Chinese student at University of Washington, Vera Zhao, in 2017. She is a Chinese of Hui background, is from a Muslim family. She visited Xinjiang in 2017 while she was studying at University of Washington, and she accessed or used VPN to submit her assignments for her university. And there is a law against using VPN in China, which is very, very infrequently enforced, but it was enforced in her case. So obviously she was under surveillance. She was arrested. She was dispatched to a detention camp for 4 months in 2017 to 2018. Thereafter, for another 18 months, she was held under effective house arrest before being released, allowed to return to the United States. She was a permanent resident of the United States. And incidentally, the University of Washington was very uncooperative and made various statements such as she's a Chinese citizen, there's nothing we can do for her. A subsequent letter of protest by University of Washington alumni accused the university of not wanting to cause trouble because of a lucrative deal, research money deal with the Chinese government. Also pointed out that when she arrived back in the United States, she was burdened with student debt and interest in student debt and fees, which had gone unpaid while she was in detention and under house arrest. The university made very little effort to address these issues, and she was not able to enroll again because she was burdened with debt. I don't know how a case has been resolved now, but there were accusations the university was very, very passive and uncooperative, both in protesting against her detention and in doing something to relieve her debt condition when she came back to the United States. So yes, another case, I guess, that illustrates Perry Link's metaphor of the anaconda in the chandelier, a law that's already enforced, that was spectacularly enforced in her case, and was high visibility, and perhaps was intended to be high visibility for Chinese students studying in the United States. Yeah, so I wonder if that metaphor applies to Professor Yuan's case as well. Well, shall we wrap up the session now? Yeah. Okay, I mean, we could stay online to, just for any kind of informal discussion we want to have, and perhaps to debrief, because it was obviously it was very emotional for us and emotional for me as well. So, all right, well, thank you everyone for joining us, and we're certainly going to try and make something out of this this session, including writing some pieces for, I hope, for the Heterodox blog and for other publications, and see if we can restart this campaign together. All right, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you, everyone, for attending. And as we said earlier, if you know of any similar cases, or if you know of any other international organizations that could help us, any kind of help, and we would appreciate it. So if you could let us know, that would be really, really great. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll have to see you again, Changji.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay. Stay in touch.
Yes.
Iwashita Sensei and I were talking about maybe trying to do something here. Excuse me, here in Sapporo, because it's been 3 years now. So and because we had COVID, for the last 2.5. So we haven't been able to do any of these press conferences that we used to have previously. But now that it's starting to settle down a little bit, and it's been 3 years since we first found out that he had been detained. So in order to encourage people to think about the case and encourage people to support us, we were thinking of doing something, but we haven't decided on what method, like, of how we would do this. But it could be a seminar. It could be a seminar. It could be a press conference. It could be asking our reporter friends to write a short piece. We haven't really decided it, but we would certainly like to sort of restart the campaign, restart the support for him now that COVID is kind of stabilizing. So we would let you know if and when we decide to do this, and if you could join us. If it's a seminar, we would appreciate if you could join us. Otherwise, we'll go back to our books and see if we've missed anything. Maybe recontact the places that we contacted before, and just to let them know that the case is still ongoing, that it hasn't been resolved, and we would like for them to help us. So we'll start by sending messages to those people that we've already contacted. Let them know that we're still here, and we're still asking for help, and we're still looking for help. So
Yes, definitely. I mean, one of the hopes we have for the heterodox East Asia community is that we can persuade our American or Anglophone colleagues this is not just an East Asian problem. It's not just a problem that's going to stay in China. This is going to affect you. This is a system of censorship that is being very effectively internationalized and weaponized in in Anglo-American universities, and people don't seem to be aware of this, and they jolly well ought to be.